This week, we continue our search for the best superhero movies with Captain America: First Avenger. Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Danny G, please let the people know what we're going to be discussing or debating today.
So this is the second episode of Superhero Hall of Fame, in which we talk about superhero movies in search of the best movies the genre has to offer. Last week, we started off with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and this week, we are continuing with Captain America: First Avenger from 2011. So Captain America was the third movie in the MCU, the last one before Avengers, and it tells the story of how Steve Rogers in World War II tries to join the military, keeps rejected again and again until he gets the attention of a scientific research experiment that turns him into a super soldier, and he then fights the Red Skull, who is this rogue Nazi scientist who was so evil he got kicked out of the Nazi party. So this movie was one of the big building blocks of the early MCU, right? So how did you discover this movie, and what was your initial experience with that?
So I didn't actually properly watch this until a little bit later in sort of like the kind of MCU release schedule. So obviously I'd watched like Iron Man when it first came out, and wasn't super invested into the superhero movies like that to have sort of known of Thor and Captain America. But then I watched the Avengers movie. And then obviously, as you're kind of watching more that came out afterwards, you're kind of like understanding that this is shared universe with all these sort of heroes that are playing their parts in it. I didn't actually rewatch it until I can't remember when I rewatched it, but it wasn't until like a little while after. Going into it, I wasn't, the biggest Captain America guy. Everyone kind of saw Tony Stark as like the cool guy. He was very quippy. He had like all the jokes. Just had like a lot of like character and personality about him. Whereas Captain America was kind of safe, always like always on the moral high ground, always like kind of like the sort of goody two shoes type of character. So I do remember when I first watched it, it didn't quite gel for me initially, and I didn't actually start liking Captain America until The Winter Soldier came out, and that's one of my top 4 or 5 MCU movies, The Winter Soldier. But having rewatched it, not just like recently, but I do remember I rewatched this about a year or so ago, and I was like, actually, Captain America: The First Avenger is a very, 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 very good superhero movie. It's a very solid superhero movie for many, many reasons. Not just the way that it establishes who Steve Rogers is, his character, kind of like what he's all about, his kind of like struggles with where he is at the start, and kind of like what he wants to achieve, but obviously has like his like physical limitations, doesn't have like the size or the strength to initially do what he wants to do before getting the super soldier serum. So I feel like they laid out like his story and his character like really well in this. But just like kind of like overall, a lot of like the side characters have quite a bit about them. They're not one-dimensional in this at all. Actually, looking at it from a little bit of a newer lens, this misconception that we had where Captain America is like kind of like a bit of a goody two shoes, the kind of like the perfect superhero, can't be faulted morally. You kind of see how some of that is challenged in this movie, where he's kind of like following orders, following kind of what he's been told, but eventually he starts to question, okay, like I'm doing all of this, but at what costs? And eventually kind of like makes the bold decision to kind of go against the grain and go against what he's been told, which then kind of like leads to the majority of the second half of the movie playing out how it does.
I think I was late to the whole superhero genre. I think actually one of my first ones I saw when I started to actually get into it was probably near high, like 16, 17. So Captain America definitely wasn't the first superhero movie that I watched in terms of like Marvel. Like I watched it, I think it's probably my second or third time. So watching it again, I really enjoyed this one. Personally for me, I think out of all the Marvel movies, from what I can remember, I think this probably has the most engaging one, which separates it from the rest in terms of the superhero movies in general. Definitely say this one would go definitely top 10. Because how obviously the story is about, the little guy becoming the big guy, as in like the guy. So I'm glad they kind of like invested a bit into the little guy story of Captain America, because that's what like hooked me at first. Because we all kind of resonate with a character like that, right? Where if you didn't grow up as the guy, right, you always want the little guy to kind of like, become the guy. So already like the character in itself was something which hooked me, like something which grabbed me. Also, its motivation as well of him. Like, I think there was a line where he said something about like he just doesn't like bullies. Obviously, where I think when I don't know who asked him the question about why he wants to be a soldier or something, he said he doesn't like bullies or something like that.
The scientist asks him if he wants to kill Germans. He says, "I just don't like bullies."
Yeah, and then when he said that, I was like, that was cold. Like it's just because obviously bullies in real life, but at the same time in World War as well. So you can they're clearly bullies as well. But you know what I'm saying? So it was just that line there that got me. So I'm glad they like invested in the little guy's story and then like it, fell into the big guy story of him actually being Captain America. So yeah, I think the reason why this superhero movie separates from the rest is just the story. Like it was a good story with superhero action. And I think that's what a lot of other films are missing. Like they have the good action, but they're just missing that engaging story. But like I was watching it again for the first time and watching it again, I was like, yo, this is actually a really, really good movie. Because Captain America was never really one of my favorite superhero characters for some reason. I have no idea. Maybe it's because I didn't like really know his story. So when I watched it again, I'm like, yo, this guy is actually like I really like this character. So yeah, I resonate with this character more than any other character in Marvel, I think.
So I kind of really got into the MCU around Phase 2, and I never had read that many superhero comics at that point. And so I kind of vaguely was aware of like the Phase 1 movies, but I didn't see them in theaters or anything like that. I think I saw Iron Man on a plane. I thought that was pretty cool and then didn't think about it for like 3 years. So I wasn't into this movie just from day one. But as I kind of got into the MCU more kind of early Phase 2, I kind of went back to the earlier ones and kind of discovered just how much I like them. And Captain America really stood out, right? Because it's just so laser focused on selling us on this character and explaining to us why he's a hero and why we should care about him as a person. I think they realized they had to do this because a hero that wears the American flag as a costume and calls himself Captain America, like that's a hard sell. Right, there's going to be all sorts of baggage and assumptions that people bring to the table, which I think has not been true since the 70s. I think they really reinvented that character during the Vietnam War. But this movie really realized that it was fighting an uphill fight and it needed to sell us on first Steve Rogers and then Captain America. And I think they really do their homework in this, right? They take a lot of time to introduce us to this guy and explain to us why he's a hero before he gets any powers, right? And I think that is really I think the core of this movie, that Steve Rogers is a hero before the movie starts, right? Because he may not have any power, but he's noble and selfless. And the movie keeps reminding us about it, right? One of the very first scenes is him trying to sneak past the draft board, right? Because he just feels such a big obligation. And he starts off kind of naive, maybe a little bit, or idealistic, which then changes throughout the movie. And then he picks a fight with the guy in the cinema. And then there's this iconic scene in the training camp where the general throws a dummy grenade and Steve Rogers is the only one who jumps on the grenade. Like all of this is before he gets the powers. And then when he gets powers, we've been primed to ask, is being a hero and being strong the same thing? That then gets linked in with the villain, with Red Skull, who has been asked the same question and came to a completely different answer than the hero. And so all of these ingredients kind of come together as a story that is not simply about, hey, we've got a character and let's have him fight bad guys for 2 hours. Like the story is really focused on this idea of heroism, like what it even means. And so I think on that level, it's like one of the best at that particular aspect of the superhero genre.
I think you said it perfectly as well. I think one thing that I wanted to highlight was when you said it was the why, as in like, why should we care about the character? And I think that's something which, from what I can remember from the recent Marvel movies that we've seen, superhero movies that we've seen in general, I think they're missing that why in terms of the character, why we should care about this character. Because a lot of the time they just focus on the problem of the character rather than they haven't like helped us to become emotionally invested into the character. I think that's exactly what this like Captain America, and I keep mentioning Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire's character, because Tobey Maguire had the similarity, was like you really invest with this character.
This time around I actually timed it. The movie is an hour 50, and at the 55-minute mark he picks up the shield and goes rogue. When that squad is captured by Hydra agents and the generals have decided it would be too costly to mount a rescue operation, the scene where he picks up a shield and together with Carter kind of hijacks his plane or commandeers his plane and kind of goes rogue, that's at the exactly 50% mark. The first half of the movie is Steve Rogers becoming Captain America, and the second half is Captain America doing Captain America things. And I think that is really one of those, like I keep seeing this in good movies where the rules change at the 50% mark, almost down to the minute. And like this is just an example of this, where it's a different movie in the second half, but the second half would not work. Like if the movie started at around that point and it was just about Captain America going rogue, it would have so much less impact because we don't know Steve Rogers at this point.
Everything that kind of happens directly before that as well, in terms of when they've put him in the costume and they've got him sort of like masquerading the towns, putting on performances, helping to sort of enlist more people into the army. I feel like that portion of the movie is excellent in terms of like him as a character, in terms of like he wants to do anything he can to sort of support and like serve the country, and even if it means he's having to sort of kind of like do this, and because like in his psyche he follows authority, he like respects authority, and he's just kind of going about following orders and putting on these performances.
In the very beginning, he's very much like he has been told he would make more of a contribution working in a factory than being a soldier in Europe, right? And he just ignores it. He just goes for what he thinks is right. So I wouldn't actually agree with the fact that like he starts off very subservient to authority or trust in authority. I think he has a very simplistic worldview at that point, which is kind of emblematic of the times. And I think his big story over the rest of the movies is him learning kind of the gray zones or the gray areas of life. But he starts off in a very black and white place. Like there are bad guys over there, I'm going to go fight them. And I'm going to overcome any obstacle that presents itself. And the first obstacle is the draft board.
I was going to kind of like compare obviously like the roadshow and sort of like kind of all of that to then that experience with the soldiers when he's like having to do the performance in front of them. And then it's a completely different reaction. It's a completely sort of kind of like different experience. And you can kind of like feel like that's kind of like the moment he realizes what he's doing isn't necessarily serious, and like you've got all of these soldiers that are actually like out there properly risking their lives and like sort of properly fighting, and it's almost like a reminder as to sort of what he wants to be doing, and sort of this whole charade and this whole sort of thing is not entirely sort of who he is or who he's meant to be. And then you then have that moment where he believes like Bucky's been captured or Bucky's sort of been killed, and then there's obviously all of these soldiers, and then obviously that's then the moment he goes rogue. But I just feel like everything leading up to that point was just kind of like great in terms of sort of understanding his character, understanding sort of why someone that has a super soldier serum and is like kind of like stronger than everybody else would sort of kind of like be in that position where he's a bit of a show monkey before actually properly taking on the mantle of sort of Captain America, and actually sort of like you said, actually starting to identify the gray areas and where he can sort of make a difference.
And notably for somebody who is like has this reputation of being this character that's so patriotic and like simplistic and just obey authority, he goes rogue in every movie, right? And at least in the Captain America movies, he goes rogue, usually to help Bucky. They kind of deliberately constructed the story to not play into that stereotype, right? Like where being like the poster child for the propaganda it's probably how he does the most good, at least in the beginning. But it's not what he wants to do, right? And so it's not what he thinks is right. And so he just finds a way to do what's right, which is his own kind of nobility, but it's not as simple as there's a bad guy, let's go punch him. So the antagonist kind of is often America, right? Like in the first movie, they want to use him for propaganda purposes. In the second movie, they're manipulating him with this whole theme of the surveillance state and everything. And in Civil War, they want him to be a tool of tool of the military, and he says, but what if somebody asks for my help? Am I not allowed to help? From the very beginning, he's got this very strong character of I'm gonna do the right thing, even if the world hates me for it, or even if the world doesn't want me to, which I think is a really interesting take on a character called Captain America, right? Because it's very much not simply an extension of America, it's more like an aspirational version of that. Just looking at the costume and the name, you might assume this is all about blind patriotism and stuff like that. But it's actually more aspirational. It's kind of fulfilling kind of the best idea of how Americans see themselves, I think. Yeah. Which I think is a really interesting and actually kind of political take. That, again, there's a Captain America movie coming out in a few weeks. And one of the things I'm curious about is how Brave New World will handle that. Will there actually be, this is not that nuanced, right? This is not the most nuanced thing you've ever seen, but it is there. And I'm really curious how they're going to do it in Brave New World, because Like, frankly, my opinion is that they've kind of become scared of any kind of hot take in that area or anything that isn't the safest of the safe.
The biggest thing that they have to deal with in that movie is how does America react to a black Captain America? And I like what the movie has to say about that aspect of it. And I'm curious to see how that movie chooses to sort of handle that. Like you said, it's like everything's gone a little bit safer. So I'm not holding my breath to see how they handle it, especially with how they handled it in Captain America and the Winter Soldier TV series. I don't think that was sort of really that well.
But I was going to say they already went to that well, and it didn't go terribly great.
No. Just to mention, and this is just like a small thing, but it's a thing that doesn't happen in sort of some of these newer movies, and it really frustrates me. But what I liked was that what's the guy's name again? Chester Phillips, I believe, was the captain. It was like sort of like him, Peggy, and the scientists that were kind of like in charge of like recruiting him initially, and he didn't want him, and the one that threw the live grenade, basically.
Yeah, the general, that's in charge of this switch up program. Yeah, what about him?
But I liked how like he wasn't one-dimensional in this, and you can quite easily see in sort of some of the newer movies where a character is just one way and the character doesn't evolve, the character doesn't change. They believe one thing, and it's just like that for the rest for the entirety of the movie. But the way that he was handled in this was that he very much had his views on what the military is and what a super soldier essentially could be based on his military background. And obviously, when he's presented with Steve Rogers, it didn't fit his like archetype. It didn't fit who he had like in his mind. So he was quite dismissive of it. And you can also you can see that by how sort of Steve Rogers is handled after the scientist dies and he's got the super soldier serum. He's like completely cast off to the side. He's completely sidelined. He didn't get his army of super soldiers that he wanted. So he just kind of very much went back to doing things how he knew how to do it.
At the same time, he also was one of the few who saw the potential in Steve Rogers.
Yeah,
right? Like initially he's really opposed to him, but as time goes on, he sees what Erskine is getting at.
That's kind of like the next part I was going to touch on, was that once he had that full evidence of, okay, he's very fearless, he's willing to kind of like risk his life to sort of kind of like do what's right and sort of go out and save all of these guys that were trapped at the Hydra base. He then completely had a different approach and a different way that he handled Steve, and he very much welcomed him in. Whereas in a lot of the new movies, the characters just like stay the same. There's no like nuance to the side characters. There's no nuance to sort of how the characters develop, and it's just like the character believes one thing, and then the character stays that one way the entire time. So that was like one thing that it was small, but it stood out to me. Just like how his opinion, his kind of like relationship with sort of Captain America was like ever changing throughout the movie.
Yeah, in general, it's a very simple movie, right? It's a very linear story. There's not much to figure out. Like the points it makes in a quite obvious way, but at the same time, all the characters kind of feel like real people. Like even the bad guys, they feel more like there's more than one aspect to their personality, which was really refreshing, right? Like if you're watching like a superhero movie made after 2017 or 2018, you don't get that much of that, right? Like it's a lot more, like you said, kind of cardboard cutout, one dimension. Everybody has one personality trait. And I think this is just a good story first, right? Like it fits into like the broader shared universe, but it's just, we actually have an idea for a story, we're going to tell it. And that fits into our big master plan of building up to the Avengers. But first and foremost, we're going to tell the story, which is why I think it works so well, and which is why I would rather rewatch this than half the movies of the last 10 years.
Even like the choreography, like from in the action scenes, like even like the settings is very, in comparison to any other Marvel movie, it's not as out of this world. This one just felt fitting for the movie, which felt very like it was so effective as well. Because obviously Captain America's powers is pretty much superhuman strength. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really feel out of this world. But because the story was so good,
he doesn't jump like 10 meters high or something like that.
Exactly.
And beyond that, they built the story kind of to showcase this character as opposed to shoehorning this character into a story. Right, like all the set pieces and all like the way he fights and who he fights is all tailored to making Captain America look good. A really memorable scene in this movie is when they administer the super soldier serum, and the saboteur blows up the lab, and Steve goes after the guy basically barefoot in a t-shirt and just chases like this Nazi spy through the streets of Brooklyn for a couple of minutes. It's a great sequence. And it's enhanced because the guy, like, he runs faster and he jumps further and he, punches harder than a regular human. But like the choreography is not so over the top that it's just clearly just CGI vomit for 10 minutes. It actually tells a little bit of a story because during that sequence, Steve discovers his powers and his new body, right? But also it's just a well-scripted action scene, right? And it showcases like a little bit of the tension between him and Peggy Carter and everything. That scene where I think he messes up her shot and she said, "I had him," stuff like that, right? Like there's character moments sprinkled in, but also there's just the basic choreography of it is simple. It's just a guy being chased, but it works and it's scaled and specific to what makes the main character look good. One of the hallmarks of bad superhero movies is when you can just swap out characters and it doesn't matter because it's just energy blasts and punches. And one of the ways you can spot a good superhero movie is if you cannot change any of the characters or you cannot change the major characters. And I think that is something, like, even though the guy just runs fast and punches hard, it's still like it feels specific to him because everything is scaled and tuned for him.
And one more thing, in terms of like replacing, right? So kind of going back to the Captain America film that's coming out this year. One thing I think that's missing, right, is, like you said, the character, like, is I think with the Captain America now, I heard you mention how are people going to get used to like Captain America being black, right? And I think that will definitely be one of the components as why people will just reject the film. Obviously, they're just terrible people out there. However, I think other people who might not like the character as well, it's not because they're racist, but I think it's because it's missing what you said before about this Captain America, because he's going to be pretty much unreplaceable. But with this Captain America, it's like Marvel haven't really like set him up well for him to be a character that is unreplaceable. Like his story, I'm still kind of unfamiliar with his story. I haven't seen his series, right? I think I watched like the first 15-20 minutes of it and I just wasn't feeling it. So I think his character is missing that whole the importance. They just haven't made him important. I keep repeating the word, but they just haven't made him important yet, which is annoying. And like I said, I do believe, yes, some people will just reject him already because he's black, but at the same time, I do believe other people will reject him because his character just hasn't been, number one, exciting. His story, very unfamiliar. I'm familiar with his story. And number three is just, well, I think most of his story was in the series, so that's just pulled from Disney themselves.
I think the series was a big misstep, and I think this movie coming out so far away from Endgame as well is another misstep, because anyone that kind of watched the series can see it wasn't like the best series, and it wasn't something the best way to handle something his character. And when you're giving someone the mantle of Captain America, and he's part of the big three of Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America being kind of like the big characters in the Marvel universe, you don't then handle the replacement in a TV series. I feel like, that needs a really good movie to like really flesh out why this person is picking up the mantle and why this person is like worthy of having the mantle. So I feel like the TV series was a misstep, and like he's almost like Sam Wilson. He's almost seen like as the perfect like sidekick. I know people really do like Anthony Mackie. I'm kind of like, he's cool to me, but he's not the name or like the face that you would typically have carrying this type of movie. So I feel like the movie's got a few challenges. And I'm not one to like write it off before seeing it. I actually do really hope that it turns out really well. But yeah, I just feel like in that period where they were kind of rediscovering themselves after Endgame, they just a few missteps, and that was one of them, having the TV series.
Yeah, my concern about Sam Wilson is just what's his story.
Yeah.
I don't even care about that much about the mantle. I think that's got to be part of the story, but that is not really the main issue. The main issue is Steve Rogers had a story, and that story unfolded throughout every appearance he had, and specifically in his three main movies. Although I think Civil War is more of an Avengers Light movie as opposed to Captain America 3. But if you just watch all appearances of Steve Rogers, you get a complete story that ends with Endgame. And with Sam Wilson, he's been in a bunch of movies, right? And I don't actually know why people have such a problem with Anthony Mackie. Every time, I actively avoid like actor interviews and stuff like that. But occasionally one slips in, and every time I see him talk about something, he's probably the least unlikable Hollywood actor that's working in Hollywood right now. it's like I don't see what problem anybody has with him. Maybe there's some interview out there that I haven't seen. But I think the guy is likable and everything, and I think he's been good as Falcon. My question is just, what is Sam Wilson's story? And how is that story continued or escalated by becoming Captain America? It looks a little bit like, well, it's either him or Bucky, and can't be Bucky, so it's him. And it's the job of the new movie to convince us otherwise, to bring this all the way back to First Avengers. From minute one, we know what Steve Rogers' deal is. And he has even if he doesn't necessarily say it out loud every time, we know very clearly what he wants and how he views the world and why he makes the decisions he makes. And there's a very clear pattern of what he does, and why he cares about what he cares about. And I can't say the same thing about Sam Wilson. And that is kind of really my problem with it, that he's kind of become Captain America by default. But is there anything there, is my question. And much like the First Avenger had to sell us on Captain America can be not lame, similarly, the next movie has to sell us on Sam Wilson as an interesting story. And if they neglect that, then I think the thing is dead on arrival. And I think this movie shows that you cannot simply have a power set. You cannot simply have a costume. You have to have an actual story at the core of what makes that character tick. And the reason Steve Rogers is such a big success, maybe number 2 success after Iron Man, as far as the MCU is concerned, is that the guy had a story and a clearly defined character, and the entire thing fed on itself, and that character was on a journey. I think this is like the first chapter of that, and it wastes no time in actually telling us what that is. Like, you cannot walk away from the first 20 minutes or so of this movie and not know who Steve Rogers is. That really goes towards why this movie is as good as it is, aside from just the writing and the action choreography and the set pieces and the performances, all of the rest of it. What makes it tick is that we know who Steve Rogers is, and we're watching him go on a journey.
I agree. And I'm just confused why they didn't follow the same formula with obviously the new Captain America that's coming out. I would have actually liked how he came to be, to help me become more emotionally invested in his character, because like I said, he's still kind of like you said, he was picked by default. So there's not really much, I don't remember much from him, as in, like, I don't know his significance in, like, you know, the Avenger movies or just him in Captain America. I completely forgot about his character. So I think, like, rather than him starting off already in the White House and him kind of like taking the shield, it'd be like, it would have probably been good if they kind of followed the same, not the same formula, but a similar formula than what they do the first Captain America, where they kind of like introduce us. They take us on a journey when it comes to his character and just introduce us again to him.
But it's like his 5th appearance or something like that. This is not like this is a new character. I think Sam Wilson has always been written as a supporting character, and that's fine. I think he's a good one. It's just, why have we seen him a bunch of times already over the course of 10 years and don't know what his deal is, really, in the sense of where he's going and what he's about. Moving on, one of the things that this movie kind of gets criticized for a lot. Number one, it's an origin story, and those are generally out of favor, right? I think the conventional wisdom is that origin stories are kind of hackneyed and out of date, and you shouldn't do them if you can at all avoid them. And this is just a very basic origin story, right? Hero gets powers, encounters a villain who is like a dark mirror of them, and then they fight, and the fight is kind of an expression of this philosophical argument, right? Which in this case is, if you are stronger than other people, does that give you an obligation to help them, which is Captain America's answer, or does it give you the right to rule them, which is Red Skull's answer? It follows the basic template of an origin story very closely without doing that much to kind of tweak it or subvert it or anything like that. But it really fits, right? Because we are introducing a new character and we're justifying who this character is and why he's interesting and all of that. And I think an origin story works well for that. But also the MCU has been kind of described as having weak villains. And Red Skull is often mentioned as an example of that. And I just don't see that at all. I think he's amazing. I think every time he's on screen, it's not just because of the actor. It's also just because I think Red Skull has a lot going on, and he's kind of this dark, like this dark mirror image of the hero. And I think that makes him interesting, because if hero and villain are in similar circumstances or are faced with similar questions or challenges, and then they do opposite things, their reasons for doing that can be interesting, and that kind of informs the plot, and it forms kind of the themes of the movie as well. And I think that is like one of the pillars of the superhero genre, And this movie just does it really well. It just takes the basics and it executes that basic formula better than most, in my opinion.
I enjoyed his performance in this as well, and I'm like the big villain guy that always roots for the villains in these types of movies. But I agree with you. Like I don't know why he would be described as one of the weaker villains in Marvel. Again, he's got like really clear defined sort of kind of like goals and sort of motivations for what he's doing. He's like really trying to like push the boat and sort of like this like scientific sort of like journey that he's on. He has like a really interesting story as well, because again, whenever you think about like Germany in World War II, you're thinking about like the Nazis, you're thinking about Hitler, and he's like this like subdivision within that, and he's like a person that's kind of like gone rogue in that, and he's like got this whole Hydra organization buried within, not just like within sort of the German army, but then clearly he's got sort of molds as well within sort of the US army as well. You know, the guy that was there during this the super soldier sort of experiment when they were sort of giving Steve Rogers his powers. So I feel like there's a lot going on. My thing is always like presence and like how is that felt on screen, and I feel like all of that is conveyed sort of really strongly with him, and he like really invokes sort of fear, even with like that scene where you've got those like German soldiers that kind of like come into his lab, and then they see that Berlin is also part of like the places that he's like planning to destroy, and then he just like vaporizes them. And then you've got Han Solo, the little short scientist, I believe, like where everyone's
Wrong
going like
franchise.
Huh?
It's Arnim Zola.
Arnim Zola, sorry, yeah, it was something Zola, Han Solo. But yeah, when like everyone's like Hell Hydra, and then you can like see their fear in his face, and he has like no other choice but to sort of pledge to Hydra as well in that moment. So I feel like he had so many sort of great moments.
I can excuse a fascist takeover of the world, but this is too much.
Yeah,
like that kind of thing. Yeah,
I don't understand why he's like described as, you know, not a great villain.
He is very by the numbers in a way. But it's just a matter of you can be original, and that's great. But if you just do the obvious thing really well, that has a quality of its own, I think. Like a lot of the time with like comic book villains, like especially in more like children-oriented media, like cartoons and things like that, villains tend to have really lame motives. They tend to be just evil for the sake of being evil. And if your target audience is like below the age of 10, then that's maybe fine. But a lot of the time, the villains are kind of just there. And I think here there's a little bit more than this, right? Like he stumbled onto this mystical power, and there's this whole exchange between the general and Zola, right? Where Zola says he thinks he wields the power of the gods, and then the general says, you realize he's crazy, right? And Zola says it doesn't matter if he's crazy, he can do it. That's the important part, right? Like this is kind of the moment at which the story kind of takes its first step into like the weirdness of superheroes, right? Where we're leaving like mundane evil behind. And now we're stepping into the point where characters are wielding cosmic energies, even if it's like just to make big guns. He's leaving behind like real world evil, like Red Skull is. There's a bunch of superhero shows like Arrow and stuff like that. And Batman Begins was similar, is where it starts off with like real evil, like in Batman Begins, it's mob bosses and corrupt cops. And then the weird people start showing up and just displace everybody, like Joker and Scarecrow and stuff like that, right? In that example. And I kind of always like that kind of transitionary era. I think it's overplayed now because after Nolan, too many people went there, but too often. But this basic idea of we are kind of taking one step into the unknown, right? We have like a real world conflict and evil and whatever. And now we're taking one step further. That's always interesting to me. And Red Skull kind of tap dances on that line, right? Like he doesn't just take the step; he's like tap dancing on it, and I think that's cool. I like watching him.
That was going to be one of my points that I did bring up in terms of like how the movie takes its time to sort of uncover its more like fantastical elements of it. And again, like you mentioned, like, you know, when Steve Rogers gets his power, it's again a lot of it's like very relatable, not relatable, but you know, it's very believable. You're like, it's very plausible. Even like when you mentioned about like when he's like wielding this like tesseract, and I don't think sort of if you're not really like a deep comic book sort of fan, you might not know it's a tesseract, but you just kind of like see this like glowing sort of blue thing or whatever. And even like how, like you mentioned, like that's used to make more weapons, which is still like something that's still plausible. It's a little bit more fantastical because it's like completely like vaporizing people, but it's still something that's like something that you can understand. And then you get to a point where sort of at the very end of the movie where he kind of like grabs the cube, and then it kind of like opens up this like sort of portal to sort of the galaxy essentially, and you're kind of like seeing sort of kind of this vastness and sort of what's out there. And of course, at the time of sort of watching it, you may or may not have seen the Thor movie, so you may or may not have sort of kind of like gone a little bit sort of cosmic with Marvel just yet. But it's just very early on in sort of the MCU, where it's kind of like laying down the foundations and laying down to like the groundwork to start to build into sort of more of like the crazier and sort of more of the sort of kind of like weirder things that's come, like the Chitauri army that comes sort of directly in the movie afterwards. Again, you kind of like have that correlation because like you've seen someone grab the cube and it's opened up this portal to space, and then that's then used to sort of send an alien army into New York, and you're kind of like following along one step at a time on this journey with Marvel sort of pretty early on. So I feel like for its timing for when it was released, I feel like that element of it was sort of handled very well. Even though I know we've gotten some other movies that have had some type of elements of that, but that slow walking the audience to sort of getting to that point was done really well. Even like Red Skull himself, because he starts off with a normal face in this. And I don't think remind me again, because like my memory's so bad. It's not until he has his like face off with Captain America when he's got like sort of the super soldier serum in the warehouse where it's getting blown up, where you actually kind of like see his face for the first time. If I remember correctly, I can't remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong.
We see the Red Skull at I think his first confrontation with Captain America, but it is said that he is the Red Skull the entire time. Like one of the things that made Erskine leave Germany is seeing what it did to Johann Schmidt, right? Yeah. And he's wearing a mask the entire time, and there's like a transitional scene where the mask around his eye is a little bit starting to tear, and there's red shining through. And then the next scene, it comes off in his confrontation with Captain America, and then they're facing each other in their fully realized forms.
It's also teased when we see him for the very first time, because I think he like plays with like the side of his face when we like see him. Again, indicating that something's not all the way right there with sort of with his face before kind of like revealing the big red skull.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned like how it ties into the other movies, right? At this point in time, it's the fourth movie or third, depending on whether or not you count Incredible Hulk, which we probably shouldn't. So the third movie, and it references both of those movies, right? Howard Stark appears with his prototype repulsor technology that later on will go into the Iron Man armor. And then at the very beginning, when they raid this monastery in Norway, there's like imagery that's reminiscent of, or that calls back to Thor, right? So it is connecting all of these different pieces. And I think Red Skull in dialogue mentions Norse mythology once or twice. So I think what this does really well is like the story stands on its own. You can show this movie to somebody and they will get it. They might not know kind of the connection between Howard Stark and Tony Stark, but they'll get what Howard Stark is about, right? And they'll kind of see that the Tesseract is the power of the gods from ancient times. And if you've seen Thor, then you've seen those gods play out their soap opera, right? But none of that is essential. You don't need to have seen Thor to understand what the Tesseract is. You don't need to have seen Iron Man to know who Howard Stark is. But if you've seen those movies, like it gives you additional background and flavor. But just by itself, this movie just works and it gives you all the information that you need to know to understand it and to enjoy it. I think that is how it should be. It shouldn't be like, did you not see the last 10 movies we put out? Well, then good luck following this one. Right, like that is kind of where it got, like things got a little too far. And I think if you've got a shared universe like this, where there's background elements that enhance what you're seeing, but it's not essential. You don't have to see it in order. Like the story is constructed in such a way to be comprehensible just on its own. I think that's what the Marvel movies have to go back to. And like that's easy when you're at the beginning. But I think that is one of the reasons why it's kind of stumbled a little bit, like one of the many reasons.
No, agreed. And again, like you mentioned, like once you're like 20, 30 movies down the line, it does become a little bit harder to sort of make those smaller connections.
I think you can. You just have to be really careful. And they haven't been careful. That's the main thing.
Yeah, no, for sure it's been sloppy.
One more point I wanted to make before we wrap this up, and this is apropos of nothing, but I just wanted to bring it up because I don't know when else I have a chance. It's really striking how pro-German the early MCU was. Like, this movie goes out of its way to not demonize Germans, right? Like, Erskine, displaced from Germany, probably Jewish, right? Or at least one of the people who were not wanted in Germany anymore, defects to the US to actively aid them, does not hate Germany, right? Talks about how the first country the Nazis invaded was Germany, all of that. Just an interesting, like even watching this back in the day, like early 2010s, it kind of stuck out to me. Like, why put this in there? If there's one group, you don't have to apologize for demonizing its Nazis, right? But they still do it, and then they do it again in Avengers, right? There's the scene where Loki needs like a retinal scan from a German scientist or something, so he crashes an opera house and makes everybody kneel before him, and there's this old guy who refuses to kneel. Said, I kneeled before men like you once, and I'm not going to do it again. And Loki says, there are no men like me, and the man says, there are always men like you. Great scene, but it's also like, again, going out of its way to portray like they're not all Nazis kind of thing, right? And I wonder if that's just somebody in the writer's room or like somebody involved in the production of the script who keep putting it in there, because it keeps showing up in Phase 1 Marvel. Just wanted to put that out there because it doesn't have to be there, and it keeps happening. It also has not been happening since then.
Maybe it's a play on, like, you know, not everyone from some of the same place kind of like represents the same things and have like same ideologies, and you know. Obviously I can see why you'd picked up on it. I didn't think about it at all, to be fair, but yeah.
It's more like they didn't have to do it, they don't do it for anybody else, and they do it in multiple movies. And then they stop doing it after Avengers or somewhere around Phase 2. Just an observation. It's neither here nor there. I just thought it was interesting. They take time of this, right? That scene where Erskine and Steve Rogers talk the night before, like in the barracks the night before he gets the serum. That is a great scene, but like half of it by runtime is talking about how Germany is not pure evil, right?
Does it like kind of juxtapose or kind of like go opposite to America's not pure good? And that kind of like maybe like feeds into, you know, the general having to make like the tough decisions to like leave the soldiers behind as opposed to someone going to like rescue them, and like Steve Rogers having to be, you know, obviously like, you know, believe in the American ideals, but you still have to be like slightly different. And maybe it's like just like a kind of like an opposite view of that, of like, you know, not all the Germans are bad, and like there are some people that aren't kind of like fed into the doctrine of something like what the Nazis are preaching and stuff like that. So that's like as you're kind of like saying it, I'm like trying to like think about how it like relates to the story, and you know how it relates to some of Steve Rogers as a character, and that's kind of like where I see.
Yeah, maybe. Is that a major part of the movie? Like this whole, it's not pure good versus evil, like about the shades of gray. Is it about that? Because you're right. Like the U.S. government is shown in a slightly ambivalent light. Right, like where they're quite ready to abandon the captured troops and stuff like that, but they're not evil, they're not sinister, not in the way they would be in later Captain America movies, which thematically ties into this whole idea of Captain America comes from a purer time, and then he comes to the modern world, like the post 9/11 world, the post Watergate world, the post Vietnam world, and it's a little bit muddier. And like at least that's like a common way of looking at it, right? If you look at the Captain America movies as a series, he comes from a time where things were simpler and clearer, and you could pick out the good guys and the bad guys very easily. And now he comes into the modern world where that is no longer true, and he's frustrated about that. That's especially what Winter Soldier is about, right? It's not like a case of there's good people on both sides or something like that, right? They don't go that far. One of the ways it ties into Captain America's arc is that he's a good man because he does good things. It's not because of how he was born or who he is or where he comes from. It's about what he does, right? That's what makes him good. And so nobody is intrinsically good or evil. It's not a major theme. It's like a sub-theme of this. Mm-hmm. And maybe reminding the audience that like this is not just like there's a difference between Nazis and Germans is maybe like in the same way that the guy in the super soldier program is a great soldier and a bad man. Right, that is one of the big points that Erskine makes, right, and that Phillips ends up agreeing with. All right, to wrap up, is this a good superhero movie? And if somebody wants recommendations for good examples of superhero movies, do you recommend Captain America: The First Avenger, and why? This
is a strong recommendation. This is a strong suggest because it's got brilliant character development. It's got some kind of clear defined who who everyone is. It also challenges the hero as well, what they believe in, how they think as well. Has an interesting something like death in there as well, which kind of like sort of helps to sort of further shape the hero in this movie as well. Yeah, like it's like there'll be a common theme with sort of the ones that we recommend, and it'll just be like strong character, strong story, and this just like has it in abundance. Plus all these sort of kind of like cool action that you'll see. It might not be like the best action set pieces, action sequences, but it's very fitting for sort of who Captain America is and sort of the way he's like kind of like learning to sort of use his shield as well. So this is a strong recommend. This is superhero movies at its best.
I would definitely recommend it. I think in terms of its story and in terms of like the character's journey, it is probably one of the best out of any superhero movie that I've seen. It's got a bit of good action, a bit of great story, a bit of this, a bit of romance, a bit of that. So it's got a bit of everything, which is what makes this a great movie as a whole. So I'll definitely recommend, like, if you want to actually be invested in something that you're watching from like the story and the action, I definitely recommend Captain America, because with the new stuff, you can get invested into something, but it's generally not like it as a whole in terms of like a good movie, but you'll definitely get invested like into the action, for example, or like the visuals or a theme that's being explored in, like, you know what I'm saying, in like the newer stuff movies, whereas this one I think it ticks like most of the boxes. So it's definitely something I'd recommend for you guys to go and watch if you're getting into the superhero genre.
Yeah, I think this is just a good action movie by itself. Strong characters, strong writing, clear themes, good performances, good set pieces. But fundamentally, it talks about what makes a hero a hero. It really focuses a lot on the motivations of one of the nobler characters that movies have produced in that decade. It tailors the story to the main character and his powers and his background and his motives. The villain is a reflection of the same ideas, just taken down a darker path. So I think this ticks a lot of the classic boxes of the genre and just does them well, better than the vast majority of other superhero movies. And actually, it might even be easier because most people have seen like World War II stories. And so this kind of is like maybe an easier way to ease somebody into kind of the reality of superheroes than, say, something like Spider-Man, which goes straight to the costumes and the crime fighting and everything. So I think, yeah, absolutely, this is at the top of the list of recommendations.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode.
Let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What did you think about Captain America, the First Avenger? What do you think about Captain America as a character himself? Is he one of your favorites in sort of the MCU or like superhero genre in general? Did you kind of like resonate with some of the story that's been told? Or do you still feel he's a bit too much of a goody two-shoes and he's like, a bit too straight down the line for you? Whatever you think, let us know down in the comment section below. And of course, if you liked what we talked about today, tell a friend. And if you hated everything we said today, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of Storm podcast.
We'll see you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. I'm not sure when the after credit scene became a thing, but I think this is the first one that's really iconic, right? Iron Man 2, I think, has the one where Nick Fury shows up for the first time, but this one where Steve Rogers shows up in the fake hospital and he figures out it's all a facade. He thinks it's a Hydra scam, and then he runs into Times Square and is stopped by SHIELD agents, and he encounters Nick Fury for the first time. I think that is one of those things that really made after credit scenes like really fashionable and really like they really convinced people that they were interesting and worth watching, right?
Nick Fury did turn up on the First Avenger, so he started with the very first one.
Was it the first Iron Man? Okay, but before that we had just seen him like recruit Tony Stark, right? But I think the scene itself is not that impressive. It's just them talking in a diner, right? But yeah. I'm just saying, like the scene, like with Captain America, the scene in Times Square itself is one of the first ones where people were actually said, "Oh, this is a cool scene," not just because of what it promises for the next movie, but actually by itself.
Yeah, I feel like it added like further depth to the character, and or if added a new story to the character, essentially making him a man out of time. Essentially, this guy that kind of like grew up in the 1930s and is now brought into sort of the modern world with sort of all the craziness that comes with it, and it's like, okay, how do you fit in now, and like what's your story in this, and like how do you deal with all the sort of characters that come with it. And then of course, you know, for anyone that knows the connection between Howard Stark and Tony Stark, and you know, knowing that these movies connected, you're like, there's that clear connection there, and it kind of like makes you want to sort of see how that sort of played out essentially. So it's yeah, definitely one of the best ones.
And it is a little bit obligatory in the sense that they have to bring him into the present day, and the movie starts with him being found, but they have to spend screen time at some point on bringing Captain America into the modern day, right? So you might as well do it in the after credit scene. And once you add it, you might as well make it a cool scene. Like they build the whole set and there's like stunts involved and stuff like that when he bursts through the walls and everything. That wasn't phoned in. Like somebody sat down and thought, okay, how can we make this cool? And how can we make this end on a high note? How can we spark people's interest for the next one? Right? Like, how can we make them want more for a year before the next one comes out?